Welcome to On Rails, the podcast where we dig into the technical decisions behind building and maintaining production Ruby on Rails apps. I'm your host, Robby Russell. In this episode, I'm joined by Florent Beaurain, a longtime Rails engineer at Doctolib, home to one of the largest Rails monoliths in Europe. Doctolib runs on over 3 million lines of Rails code, with hundreds of engineers contributing daily. Their test suite, more than 80,000 tests per commit, which takes 130 plus CPU hours. Florent shares how his team revisited Rails defaults to improve developer experience and cut infrastructure costs, like dropping one engine's test time from 7 minutes to just under 1. We talk about what slows big test suites down, how to fix it, the hidden cost of using factories, why Packwerk didn't quite live up to the dream, how they route read traffic across Postgres replicas, and lessons from years of Rails upgrades in a fast-moving organization. Florent joins us from the north of France. All right, check for your belongings. All aboard. Florent, welcome to On Rails.
Thanks, Robby. Thanks for inviting me.
So a question I like to start with is, what keeps you on Rails?
When I was at school for development and engineering stuff, we did a lot of C and C++, and I basically hated it. I almost quit school because of that, and it completely changed my life to do something else. I think I was in like a third grade or something like that, and we have this big project over 2 years to complete our studies to do. And that's the only project where we were free to choose the technology. And one of the guys at my school was doing Ruby on Rails, okay? And he was talking a lot about it, how it's amazing and stuff. So with my group, we decided to pick it and try. That's the first time we wrote some Ruby and some Rails. And I was so impressed on how everything is easy. Everything I needed, it was already there. Okay, it was either already in the standard library, or we have it in active support, or we have a gem for it. And so the experience was amazing. And it was the revelation. I was like, that's what I need. I'm not smart enough for C stuff, C++, always rebuilt everything. But this is the kind of thing I like. And that's what brings me to Ruby. And I never changed since. Been almost 10 years now. And I have done nothing else than Ruby and Ruby on Rails.
Do you remember approximately what version of Rails that was? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head.
5, I think, okay. Something like that, or 4, or yeah, the transition between 4 and 5.
You know, for me, having been in the Ruby on Rails ecosystem for over 20 plus years now, it's always interesting to get to talk to different people that are introduced to Rails at a different point in the life cycle, where you mentioned that there's all these gems available to do a lot of things you wanted to accomplish. And so there was this huge ecosystem that had been around for a decade already. And comparing that to your experience with the other languages that you were learning in school, do you feel like Rails is kind of like what keep you interested in computer science then in many ways?
Yeah, 100%. When I say I was on my way for quitting, it was the truth. It was clearly not for me. My grade was not good enough at school, etc., because it doesn't keep me interested on the thing. And I was, okay, it's too hard for me.
Were you thinking about software development at that point in terms of like how you would use the technology, in terms of like when you were working and learning at computer science, were you thinking, I want to build web application type tools or backend or closer to the hardware? Like, was there something kind of drawing you to specifically toward maybe a more web-centric area for development?
Not at the beginning. That's my internship that brings me to the web, because when you try to find an internship, at least in France, most of what you will find is basically in web. So that's how I started web development. And my final project was in Ruby on Rails, and so for the web. And that's where I discovered that this is an amazing platform. You know, you can build so many things so easily, and you can push it to millions of people. The experience was amazing, so I keep pushing on that. And that's also where you have most of the job also.
That's true. I think being able to deploy an application to the internet and have anybody be able to access it anywhere with their web browser, that's very different than being able to like ship some physical product and hoping that people will buy it. And then your code might end up working in someone's device somewhere or something. It's interesting. I learned a lot about the organization you work for called Doctolib and how I think it's one of the largest companies that's using Ruby on Rails, I think, in Europe. Is that correct?
Yes, probably, at least in France.
We had a brief conversation before this, but I know that Doctolib's CI suite currently runs 84,000 tests,
yes,
which consumes over 130 CPU hours on a full run.
Exactly.
Just trying to wrap my head around that a little bit. How did it get to that point, first of all?
So I joined 8 years ago and we had like 5,000 tests. So it was running on Jenkins at that time. And it was working pretty well. Then when I joined, we were like 15 engineers. And then that was the point where the company was growing a lot. Okay, so we were hiring 100% per month, 10 to 15 engineers per month joining the company. So it was pretty fast. So quickly we had massive amount of engineers and we starting to write a lot of tests. And so this number grew quickly. So the time on Jenkins was not acceptable enough. So we migrate to, I think it was Heroku CI at that time. So we had the parallelization of Heroku CI with 15 workers, if I'm not wrong. So that keep the CI time a bit lower. And then we grow test. And then we end in this situation where we are now on infrastructure and stuff to run the CI, which is currently bigger than our production platform.
In that context where you were onboarding a lot of new developers, and you mentioned you started there around, say, 5,000 tests, and now there's 84,000 tests in your test suite. At the time when you joined, how was the code to test ratio at that point? Was it pretty consistent to what it is now, and the application's just grown that much more? Or was there a considerable amount of time invested in writing a lot of tests that needed to already be there? When you joined, was there a lack of test coverage?
If your question was, do we have a lack of coverage when I joined, it was not the case. It's really a linear growth based on the more capacity to ship more. It was already very in the culture to write a lot of tests when I joined, and mostly end-to-end, and we can talk about that later. So that explains the number of tests and the big number we have now.
I think for people listening, like, well, if you have a bunch of automated CI running and it's taking that long, is that really a problem? Is that something you needed to address or kind of focus on improving?
The duration we have on the pull request, I guess we have to work on that a lot. You have basically several options on the table. I think it's like scaling a web application. Either you throw money at it or you throw manpower to it to try to make it faster or at least more performant. So we can do both. We throw a lot of money to it to have more parallelization. So we just basically add more servers to treat one commit. So at some point, we are launching like 315 servers for one commit.
Oh my gosh.
That's basically one way of fixing it. And the other way is to putting some people on it, trying to make it more performant. The third way we have also is finding a way to launch less tests. So basically applied principle based on the pull request and select the test you have to run. That's another way to reduce it. So we also do that. And that's the way we have to basically scale that. But at some point, the duration is a problem for the velocity of the team, and we have to find a way.
Yeah, I can see that potentially causing a lot of bottlenecks. I would imagine if it takes that long and say a couple tests break or you have a couple of flaky tests. How many engineers, for context, do you have right now? I think it's like over 700 engineers now.
We are something around 400 and 500 engineers working on the monolith.
400 or 500. My apologies, not 700. And then given that, so like if there's a scenario where people are pushing things, and I could just imagine there being a lot of branches that get stuck in a merge queue because of tests not working or something. It takes that long. When someone's trying to finish a project that they're working on or a task or something, that feedback cycle must not be able to run the whole test suite on their own local development reliably, can they?
No, in local it's impossible. That's currently an issue that we have. We don't have a merge queue. The stability of our main branch is crucial, because if for any reason the main branch is red, basically everyone is kind of shut down. And currently, I think the pipeline takes 40 or 45 minutes. So if you rebase on main, unlucky you are, it was red or potentially becoming red in a few minutes. You launch it and you come back 1 hour later and it's red. You have to rebase, relaunch, and you lost 1 hour. So yeah, clearly. So that's where test selection is really important to try to reduce the time. So if you don't touch much things and you work on your own engine, you can expect to run a few hundred tests. So it should be pretty fast. Not that fast because there is incompressible things in the workflow, like building the Docker image and stuff, but you can expect a faster time.
How long ago did you start working on trying to focus on just improving the performance and speed of your test suite?
I have been at Doctolib since 8 years, so I think it has been the work of a full feature team since 8 years.
And then, so over the last 8 years, you're keeping an eye on these things as the team's growing and the code base is growing. I know that you mentioned that there's some slowdown that came from, I think you specifically talked about the database in particular. Like in one of the approaches with Ruby on Rails with a typical test suite is that you run your tests and it's constantly resetting your test database in between running those tests. What's wrong with that potentially? Or what doesn't work about that?
Okay, so I was staff on working on improving the developer experience. So that was not specifically CI oriented. It was really, okay, we want to improve the developer experience locally. And as Shopify, we have split our monolith in what we call engine on our side. Shopify, I think they name that components. Okay, so it's small boxes of where people put their code. And when I mean their code, it's their applicative code, but also the test to test it. And we were like, okay, if we want to improve the developer experience, one way to do that is having people being able to launch their test locally. Okay, so go out of this CI-driven development workflow we had, where we just do stuff locally, test it. If we test it, in development on the UI, but then push it and expect that the CI is green. And then if it's not, take the test failing and just starting from there. But you have already lost 45 minutes. So our take was, if the engine is isolated enough, just launching the engine test should be enough to have the big picture of what will fail or will it pass the CI. But even just launching this subset of tests locally was pretty slow. When I say pretty slow, it's like something around 300, 400 tests. It was like more than 6 to 7 minutes on M4 macro. So pretty slow. So we wanted to improve that. And so most of my teammates was, Ruby, it's a bit slow, etc. So I did this small video to back the project where I put a vanilla Rails app and I create thousands of tests and I launch them locally with the same setup as well. So a Docker running a PG database, etc. And it was incredibly fast. Okay, it was a matter of seconds to launch thousands and thousands of tests. And I was, okay, so that's not Ruby the problem, that's not Rails the problem. And if you follow David on Twitter, you see recently he did a lot of benchmark with the A test suite where he launched thousands of tests and it's fast. So why it's not fast on our side? So I did a couple of flame graph and stuff to see what is the bottleneck on our Rails application. And I came to the conclusion of several things. One of the main bottleneck is the database. Several things at the database level. We are resetting the database between each test. That's a common pattern, but this is very slow. And it's even slower in our Rails application because we have multiple databases. So for each test, we don't reset only one database, but we reset 10 databases. And every time we add a new database, it's becoming slower and slower. So we had to change that basically. And it was accounting for almost, I would say, something like 30% of the time of the test duration for unit test, not for end-to-end test, of course. For unit test, it was a massive amount. And the second conclusion is factories. Factories were pretty slow because they are interacting with the database. This database, which is in a Docker running on macOS, so not a perfect world. So the database is basically slow by itself. Not all our factories are pretty well built. Okay, so some are crunching some Ruby a lot, triggering some events that unqueue stuff, that create another object, etc., etc. So we have a cascade of a lot of amount of objects just to create, for example, one account. So when I measure it, we are spending like 50% of the time in factories for test.
One of the things you mentioned there around, it's a common pattern is to reset your test database between tests. Do you have a good sense for why that's an important thing for test, or because to try to maintain or just to avoid any weird things if you're just trying to run a quick test?
So I will not advise anybody to not resetting the database between tests. Okay, it's really important to avoid to have test data that leak to other tests, and so have a consistency in your test to avoid flakiness, for example. But there is other way of doing it than just taking all the table and truncate them.
Yeah.
That's what we were doing basically in a more optimized way than truncate on all the table, but that was basically what we were doing.
You also mentioned having, say, 10 different databases or so that you're connecting to, is in what context would that be happening? Is this like a multi-tenant type of application, or
No.
there's just 10 different databases for different types of data that need to be very, very much distinct?
Yeah, so it's for scalability issue. So I think we can go to that later.
Okay.
But that's how we scale our app, basically.
To kind of circle back, you talked about using some flame graphs tools, and that led you down the path to looking at how the application was, or the test suite was resetting the databases between every test that it was running. You've identified factories. There's concerns there that that wasn't entirely super efficient in some aspects. Were there other things that you also noticed during that kind of research process?
So factories, the resetting of the database, and then what comes to be basically some bloat we have added over the year. The monolith is now 12 years old, so we have added a lot of small things here and here because someone wanted to fix something, because he had a red, or because we wanted to put some safeguard, to avoid someone to fall in this trap again. And all those things are always done in a good intention first, but without always, we don't monitor. You put it here, but you don't really know the global impact. All you know is just that it fixes your problem. That's basically it. And all those things, you add it, it's 1 MS here, 2 MS here, 3 MS here. But at the end of the day, when you have 80,000 tests, it becomes a massive problem. So that was basically it, the 3 problems we had. The database resets, the factories, and the bloat we have added over the year.
So you identify these different areas. Then as an organization, how do you, or maybe your team in thinking about the developer experience, how do you then begin to start prioritizing, finding ways or solutions to improve that situation for yourselves?
I presented my research, basically, and I said, look, that's what people get when they have a vanilla rise apps. That's our current experience. And here are the things that differ between two. And so this is the 3 things we can work on. And they were pretty convinced that we had a case. So they allowed us to work a bit on it and make our point. Okay, so basically we had a couple of weeks to migrate one of our engine to a new testing framework that was fast enough, or at least faster than what we had. So that's basically what we did. To me, we don't usually do that. We don't usually rewrite things, or we are more in the small improvement things every time. But for this case, it's too much. We have too much bloat. If you touch one thing, everything will fall apart. So we should probably restart. And I was pretty convinced that there's not that much, in fact, in our CI. And we can migrate a big part of it without having to reconstruct everything. Okay, so that's basically what we did. We create our own test classes based on the vanilla Rails test classes, and we put nothing more in it. And we started with our engine. So we had a lot of redness, of course, on it. So we bring back the code needed to make it green. And we tried back and forth like that. Okay, this helper is missing. This helper is missing. We had this configuration before, and do we need it or not? Okay, and so we even changed a bit our test to make it pass. And thanks to that, we built these new classes on our engine, and we win. I think we started this engine. It was taking like something around 7 minutes to run, and we go down at 2 minutes. We added a bit of parallel testing to get the extra juice from the Mac M4, and we go down below 1 minute.
Oh, wow.
So then we share that, and people were, okay, we need that. And so we get the time to work for the full code base migration.
So you were able to identify one of your engines. And how did you go about selecting one? Was it one that you felt pretty confident that your team had a lot of exposure to? Or you mentioned that you had a pretty reliable test suite already. And so I'm trying to imagine you in an editor, like looking at your existing test suite. Out of curiosity, what was the test suite that you went from and what did you move to?
So for the engine selection, it was a trivial choice. We just took the one where we have code ownership on it. So it's easier to modify things. We don't rely on the approve process of someone else. We also try to take one that is not too difficult to migrate with, like a lot of end-to-end tests, with mobile tests. So we try to pick an easy one, but not too easy. So it's kind of representative. We try to take an average engine, a recent one, without too much legacy. And that's what we have targeted. So we have one. It was like trivial to choose.
What test suite framework are you using there?
So we are using Minitest for the whole test suite. We have just a small, we have something, Minitest spec Rails, I think, to have a bit of spec stuff included in active support test case, but that's it. It's Minitest and we haven't changed that.
You know, in one of our previous conversations, you kind of described this kind of as a hard reboot on your test architecture or infrastructure, kind of leaning back into Rails defaults. So did you feel like there were a lot of defaults that had been changed over those several years? And that kind of, you mentioned people with good intentions and there were kind of global impacts to make things a little bit slower. What were some of the patterns that you kind of noticed that you were needing? Were there configuration things that you were just able to, we don't actually even need it like that?
Yeah, I think the two things is not using fixtures and use factories instead. That was, I think, 10 years ago, that was the default. You know, you Rails new and you just basically put factory bot in it, and that's the way to go. So I think Doctolib started like that. So that's one thing we really want to change. So go back to fixtures. And the second thing is transactional testing. So instead of resetting our database with custom code truncate, we started to use transactional tests that exist in vanilla Rails app. And the idea behind transactional test is when you start your test, we will take a transaction on your database. Everything you will do will be done inside the transaction. And at the end of the test, the transaction will be rolled back, which is way faster than truncate all the table. And that's basically the two things we have done to go back to Rails default. When I say we have done, the transactional test is done. The fixture things, it's ongoing. It's a bit more complicated, but we have started to migrate some factories to fixtures.
So the application started being developed a couple of years before you were introduced to Rails. Do you feel like you have a sense of why the Ruby on Rails community started to embrace patterns like using factories versus fixtures?
I guess. I think fixtures, like, it's one of those things, you know, that when you are introduced to it, you don't like it. It's, you know, it's YAML file, you have to fill, it's inflexible. You also feel like you start your test, you have tons of data, and there's some you need, there's some you don't need. It doesn't feel the right way, I mean. So yeah, I think it's not flexible enough, and that's why people prefer to go to factories, because it's flexible. But that's also, I think, the drawbacks of factories. So it's kind of like, we don't like it because it's inflexible, but that's the strength of the thing. And we like it because it's flexible, but that's also the main drawback of it.
It's such an interesting thing where, you know, remember, it's been such a long time now since that kind of began to permeate in the community. But I think this was at the time a like developer ergonomics thing. It felt like as a developer working with, using and interacting with factories felt a little bit more friendly to us as developers versus handcrafting some YAML files and maintaining well-defined and strict. It's kind of like working Python versus Ruby, where you got to think about formatting and stuff. And like, so we're like, oh, this is so much better. I can express myself. But then there's this, you fast forward several years and all of a sudden, like, that's the thing that's slowing down your developer experience for running your test suite and causing other types of there's side effects to that. So I'm like, do you think there's a world where there's something in between this that would make a developer experience of just writing tests a little bit nicer? So we're not thinking about fixtures in the same way, but get the fixtures are faster. But where's this balance there?
So yes, I would say. In our case, we are still keeping. So we have factory bot and some fixtures. So we are in the middle ground. If I had to start fresh, one of the things we'll do, and that's what I do on my pet project, is I'm using fixtures, and Shopify have a tool named Factory Fixture or Fixture Factory, I never know. And basically, it's a tool you can add in your app, and you can take a fixtures and say, I want this fixture, but a bit different. So it's kind of the middle ground where you have fixtures, and thanks to the fixtures, you can test 80% of your app. And then you use factory fixtures or fixture factory to create some object to test edge cases, etc. And just some helpers basically on top of it. But I kind of like this pattern.
I'll definitely include links to that once we track that down in the show notes for everybody. Is that one of Shopify's gems, you think?
Yes, it's a Shopify gem, factory fixture, I think. And it's really like when you use it, you declare a factory and you say, I want a user like Bob, but I want it to be admin, for example. And you just put admin true. And so you have something like Bob, your fixture Bob, but with admin.
I would imagine that must add a little bit of latency, or takes a little bit more time to process that, I would imagine. But I think if you can use those where sparingly, you might be able to keep your test suite running as fast as you possibly can make it, I suppose. So going back to your story there, as an organization, you identified an engine, you went through and you were able to get an engine that would take approximately, say, 7 minutes or so to run, just that engine's test suite, down to, say, less than a minute. And then all of a sudden, the rest of your team gets it and you're like, all right, we can get more buy-in to start tackling more engines, or do you start going towards your larger applications? And is that something that your team just was responsible for kind of rewriting tests in this type of approach, or was that then spread out to the rest of the organization?
So very good question. We had some kind of disagreement around that. I was more pushing to, take the opportunity of a great reset to rebuild everything, meaning that we build the framework and we put a deadline to teams to migrate to it. So we make everything we can to make it easier for them to migrate, but we let them handle it so we can have a bit of smartness to it, So they migrate, they see stuff, they report to us, we fix, we can improve the solution, and we can also say, no, but these kind of things, we don't want to see it anymore. There is a lot of patterns we had in the code base that was not acceptable anymore from a performance standpoint. Overall, didn't convince people, so we decided to go for another solution where we migrate everything ourselves. So we have to make some trade-off in that, where we cannot rewrite every test and everything for everybody. So we had to keep a maximum of compatibility with what we had in our new framework. Okay, so I think we lost a bit of performance gain, but overall we migrate. I think now we are at 90% of the code base to the new framework. So in 3 months, I think it's an achievement, and we are pretty happy about it.
This episode of On Rails is brought to you by Concerns, the lightweight supplement for bloated models and scattered logic. Are your controllers overworked? Models doing too much? You might be a candidate for Concerns. Just one include a day can help extract shared code across your app, whether or not that code actually belongs there. Concerns are modular, reusable, and questionably named. Side effects may include unclear ownership, callback confusion, and saying we'll refactor this later at least once a week. Ask your tech lead if Concerns are right for you. Concerns, because everything has to go somewhere. Can you tell us a little bit more about, as you were introducing, say, like there's new and then you had these legacy test cases to support transition. Did you use any tools to try to automate much of that? Or was that primarily, was there some copy pasting between files and things like that? Or what did that look like?
So it's one of my teammates that have done it, Francois. A lot of things was just search and replace, basically, to replace the class name to another one, launching on CI. I think he split it by engine. So he was migrating one engine and another, etc. I think he used also a bit of, nothing too complex, but a bit of AI to migrate it. So we had basically a Confluence page explaining the breaking changes. The point was for if users wanted to migrate, they can. So we maintain this list of, if you have this error, you have to do this. If you have this error, you have to do this. If you have this error, you need to include that. And I think he used a bit of AI to feed with this document to migrate some tested.
One of the things we didn't touch on, but is Doctolib's platform primarily composed of a monolith with a bunch of engines, or are there a bunch of external, like other services, or kind of somewhere, is it a hybrid situation there?
10 years ago, we had this monolith. Over the last 6-7 years, we migrate from this monolith to a monolith with some engine inside it. And now, since 2 years, we also have some external services. So we have this big monolith, and 80% of the traffic is still going through the monolith, but we have also some new services.
Are those also built with Ruby and Rails, or are you using some other technologies, frameworks for those?
No, they are in Java, most of them. We have a bit of Node, we have a bit of Elixir, we have some in Rust. Most of them are in Java, and the strategy is to have the external services for now in Java. And because of acquisition or some other stuff, we have also some service in other language.
I see. And then I think another thing that I know that you folks are using Packwerk, I believe, to modularize parts of your code base. So
yes.
Were you around when that decision was made to start using Packwerk?
Yes, in fact, it's my team that decided to do it. So I was in like this architecture team we had at this time, and that's the time where we have this big monolith code base, and we were like, okay, it cannot fit in one head, so we have to find a way to have a team that can work in these small boxes and just have to have these boxes in his head. So have several monoliths, or I don't know. And the strategy was to use Rails engine to build these small boxes. And that's where we started. So exactly like Shopify with their components. I'm not sure they are using Rails engine to do it, but anyway, that's kind of the same idea behind it. Quickly after, they released Packwerk. And we were, okay, it's a no-brainer for us because it's basically exactly what we are doing and what we want. So the idea of this small package that have their own public API. So if someone wants to discuss with it, they have to go through this public API, and we have this declaration of dependencies, etc. So that was a no-brainer for us. So we adopted it, and we are still using it. But and I think that's what you want to discuss after. We have a small disillusion about it.
Oh, interesting. Initially, as you were thinking about as an organization, like how to allow teams to kind of focus on their area that they're going to own, and they would have expose a public API and such using something like Packwerk, are your teams like kind of separated already by different areas of your monolith, or is it people jumping in and out of things and like this kind of wrap your head around this part of it and that's where they're going to focus, or people jumping around quite a bit between different areas of your platform?
So we have what we call domain, okay? And so a domain is responsible of a big chunk of the product. And inside domain, we have feature team, and each feature team have a bit of the scope, okay? And they shared like that. So everything is really well cut inside the organization around that. And of course, the code base is following this pattern. Every file is owned by a team. Each engine is owned by a team. It's really well defined which part is owned to who. And it's not who can work, everyone can contribute, but that's not what we have tried to do, but it's more, everyone has his own part of the code base.
Did adopting Packwerk help the developer experience in terms of things like local dev performance or test reliability, or was it more of a, like, let's just allow people to work in their domain a little bit and focus there?
I don't think so. That's my take, it's personal, but one of the things was, okay, we want to modularize the monolith. We want to do it for the developer experience, but it's also a great way to improve test performances. As I said a bit earlier, we had this test selection stuff that tried based on the diff to launch just the test we need. So if we decouple the application and the engine from other part, we should normally be able to launch just a subset of the test. If you work on your engine, you should be able to launch just your engine test, and you should be pretty confident in real life. So I don't think it has much improved the situation.
Can you speak to that a little bit more? Like if one of your teams works on like a set of features and maybe they're responsible for an engine or two, and they're running their test suite for their area, what doesn't work about that in air quoting the real world? Like in the situation where like, are they a lot more tightly coupled to other areas? Tell us more.
So it's a big topic, but I think getting to a zero dependencies package is a chimera. We have not been able to do it. And if you want to do it, you will have to, in a big application after several years of working, I'm not speaking about a greenfield app, you will have to invest massive amount of time to reach it. And by doing so, you will probably make the code worse in terms of readability. You will have to inverse a lot the dependencies, and because of that, you will use events that will make everything worse for debugging and trashability. So yeah, it's a complicated topic, but I don't think it's reachable to have zero dependency things. Also, Packwerk has its own limit. It's a static analysis in Ruby. So even if you reach zero in Packwerk and you try to launch your CI with just this engine, for example, there is a high chance that doesn't work and you will have other stuff to fix. Over time, you will have to do it again and again and again because someone will introduce a dynamic reference and it doesn't work anymore. And so it's really a lot of work and a big investment to reach that. So It's a nice tool. We still use it, and I still think people should use it. But don't fall in the chimera that you will just work in your engine, launch the test of your engine, and it will be amazing.
You and your coworkers there have seen a lot of benefits from it, but it didn't necessarily deliver on that promise or the illusion that you're going to be immune to a lot of similar issues that you already have in your code base where
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly that. Yeah, you won't be immune to that. Also, Packwerk tell you that here there is an issue, but it doesn't tell you how to fix it. It's not always that easy to fix a dependency. That's what I was saying. Sometimes we make it worse by trying to fix it. So yes, that's key date. We are not immune. Tool is not perfect. I mean, it's just a tool.
when you get to that number of engineers, I can only imagine. I've never worked in that type of space myself, so I have no concept of like just how much is happening on a day-to-day basis, and to try to protect the code base as much as you can and protect the individual developers. That's a lot of competing things, and be able to move fast. And you don't want to slow down the velocity of your dev team, but you also don't want everybody just throwing code wherever at the time, and there's not someone that's there to make a decision on every single thing. So it's this interesting immersion of code off. And out of curiosity, are you also using any AI stuff now and doing any code generation also with AI and taking advantage of that, or is that helping at all? Or
we have basically full access, and we can leverage it as much as we want. So we have access to Cloud Code, we have access inside the ID, we have access to inside GitHub Action, so we can automate a lot of stuff, and we are encouraged to that. I think it's a great tool. I don't use it much myself for code generation. I don't really like it. Like Copilot, autocomplete, etc. I prefer to type the code myself. I use it more like a pair programmer, or when I want to have a second opinion on stuff, or to shape my mind about something for draft or this kind of stuff. But I think it's a really cool tool for onboarding in a new code base. I know that a lot of new joiners use it, like how we do that in the code base. Because of course, at the size, you try to stick to the default and stick on how Rails work, but there is some stuff that it's not enough, and you want more, so you build your own. And so people can, they need to know how you do that. So they use a lot the tools for that. Myself, I use it a lot to build some workflows to make the things. Like we have feature switches inside the code base, and we have an expiration date on feature switches. So basically, a team wants to build a feature, they create a feature switch, and there is an expiration date on the feature switch. So they put it like in 3 months, 6 months. Often team forget to do the cleanup. So they have the feature switch, it's enabled in production, but the feature switch is still there in the code base, and there is a else branch that is useless anymore now. So I have these workflows that try to clean them up. Take the expired feature switch, open the pull request, ping the team, and they just have to review and make a few adjustments if needed. For this kind of stuff, I find it pretty useful. This current work, it was not that easy to automate before, because you need a bit of logic on, this not just a search and replace, it's, I have if enable, I have to remove that, and I have to refactor the file. So it's a bit more complex than, so the LLM bring this bit of intelligence, if I can say, that allow now to automate this kind of stuff, and it's pretty interesting.
Actually, really curious about your feature switches. So is that your way of deprecating a set of features that you're going to remove at some point, or is this needs to turn on at a certain point, or is it kind of like you mentioned, kind of like a feature flag? But in what context, or like what pattern does Doctolib use with your team we need to remove this at some point? Or
we use it for basically everything. So it's a complete system now with factor feature switch, country feature switch, etc. But that's how we deal with removing a feature, as much as introducing a new feature to clients through cohort and stuff. Also, how we change a query, for example. Sometimes we just put a feature switch to change a query because we are not sure the query will be performant enough in production. So it's really a way to deal to release any sort of code or to remove any sort of code for the stability of the platform, basically.
When does your team need to make that sort of call on that granular of a level of, there's a team might have a hunch or suspicion that this query might be less performant once we roll it out to production, so we want to kind of test it out? Is that kind of speak to not being able to run like a test against something more like a production data in like a staging or QA environment, or your local development's never going to have that level amount of data there?
Yeah, we don't have this amount of data in staging and test environment, so we cannot really test that here. Even if we have the data in staging, it's not the same, so the query plan won't be the same. It's really hard to replicate that in other environments. So we really incentive people to use feature switch for any kind of stuff. We have make it really trivial to add them. But if things goes wrong, we prefer if it's feature switch, basically. Yeah, we put basically everything behind it.
In those situations where you got these feature switches, does that not, I'm just going to ask kind of like a dumb question here, but does that not introduce a little bit of performance implications itself that you're having to check the current status on these feature flags as you're executing the code? Does any of this code ever get cached?
Yeah,
in the server that's running and like.
So they are stored in the feature switches are stored in the database. So of course there is a kindergarten overhead, but we are using that since so long that we have optimized it a lot. There is caching at the request level, there is caching at the worker level. Every time you check for a feature switch, we don't retrieve them from the database. It's now almost transparent.
There's a pattern there. If one of your teams is going to ship out something that's maybe has this example of a query that you want to see how it's going to perform in production, you ship it out. Do you tend to default it to being off by default or on? And you're like, okay, ship, or is it kind of it depends, but then the process is like it's shipped out to production, it's deployed. Now someone's looking at some metrics that are coming in and you're like, all right, I'm going to flip the switch and see what happens for the next 10 minutes and be like, oh, that didn't work out. Turn it off. Is that how that's working?
We roll out, it's false by default. And then we have an UI to activate it. And that's basically what people use. As I said before, there is different types. There is like the on-off, basically Boolean. But we have also a factor feature switch where we can release it for percentage of traffic, 1%, 10%, etc. So depending on the criticity of what you're doing, you can use that. You cannot use it in all the cases. There is no stickiness to it. People activate it and then they monitor and they can quickly go down. We are also investigating currently to have auto rollback on the feature switch, to have some automated process. So we use Datadog as an APM, and we have also Sentry for the error reporting. Actually, that's a great, probably something about AI. So we had this idea to use Datadog with an alert to auto rollback, but I have also in mind to try to, there is Datadog have an MCP server and Sentry also. I kind of want to try to let an LLM make the call if we should roll back or not. So basically, when I have a feature switch that is put on, off, I have an event, and then I can trigger the LLM that can monitor Sentry and Datadog in the next 10, 15 minutes and make the call if we should roll back or not. That's something I want to try. Sounds
interesting. I know I've been following a little bit about Sentry's doing there in particular, because I just follow one of them on social media and stuff like that. I know he's been talking a lot about that. But curious to see how that kind of pans out. But I think I've seen people talking about like self-healing things and like having the error reporting tools send you PRs for the potential fix for something. And you're like, I'm like, that's fascinating.
I think there is something like that. It's Sentry. I haven't tried, but I think there is something like that to investigate your stack trace. It will be probably okay in most of the cases. I mean, a lot of Sentries we add is a trivial fix. So I'm pretty sure LM can be good at it.
Yeah. I think that could be quite interesting. Let's talk a little bit about scaling your database. I know that Doctolib is, I think you're using Aurora Postgres. Was that right?
Exactly, yes.
My understanding that you've hit AWS's limits, and you're not the first team I've talked to recently specifically saying this, like you're running on the largest instances, right?
Yep. Yeah, we are running on the largest instances. We have 10 writers today, and each writers can have up to 15 readers. And we already have some writers that reach this readers limit. So we have to remove stuff from this writer and put it elsewhere.
Why aren't they just making larger systems? I'm kind of being a little facetious there, but are you just storing too much data? Tell me more about that. Like when you get to that scale where you're like hitting the ceiling in that way, you're like, you'll eventually have to spin up 11 and the number 12 servers, or tell us more about like, what's the situations that you're needing to navigate there? How do you mentioned maybe needing to move data somewhere else. Tell us more.
Yes, that's basically it. So currently our bottleneck for the scaling is probably almost everyone is the database. So when I joined, we had one writer and several readers, and we push that as far as we can. So for the readers, you can have readers, but you need to send queries to it. Okay, so we had some manual code inside the code base to send queries to the readers, and we push that where we code. And at some point, the writers had too much load into it. So we need to figure things out. When we looked into the writer, one of the issues had that, in fact, the writer had so many reads to it. So we need to find a way to offload those reads to the readers. So we have worked on a solution to automatically send reads to the readers by analyzing the query. We parse the query, we look if it's a select. If it's a select, we can probably send it to the reader. Then we look if we have right inside the table the select is looking to in the same request. If not, we send it to the reader. If yes, we keep it on the writer because there is replication lag between the writer and the reader. So to avoid to have stale data, we keep it there. And so we have done that. And we have improved it over the year to offload a maximum of the read into the readers. And it was not enough. One writer at some point was not enough. Not because of the amount of data. I think on our main writer, there is like 40 terabytes, something like that. That's not really the issue. The issue is more the number of operations we do on it every second. That's more the I/O, the problem. So we needed to have a second writer. So we put a second writer. But once you have it, you need to migrate the data from your main writer to the second one. So you need to select which table you need to move. You have to do it with care because you have to select the table. You won't move one table. You will move a group of tables that are very related to each other to keep the join and the foreign key, etc., etc. And to do it safely, you have to first ensure that there is no join from the table you won't move to the table you will move. And you need to build tooling around that, etc., to be able to do it safely. And also because you know that that's not the last time you will do it. So you need to automate that. And that's how we ended with 1 to 2 and then 2 to 3. And now we are at 10.
It's interesting. I don't have it in front of me, but I think I saw someone at Intercom post something the other day on social media. They were evaluating their reads, and specifically that how much data they were sending to their readers by specifying the columns names that they wanted to select. And they were finding that that was actually a pretty big performance issue where you were sending all this select 30 column names versus select an asterisk. Just the text being sent across from your app to the database as a reader. And I'm like, these are the types of issues you have at that scale. And it's like, well, you don't want to bring everything back on every query, because that doesn't seem performant either. But also like you're sending data to the server, and so it's like, that's a big chunk to get less data back. There's an interesting compromise. I hadn't really thought about that. And I was like, oh, have you encountered anything like that yourself?
Yes and no. So I mean, we don't really measure that, and we don't really bother to just select what we need. Okay, we are still on the Rails default, if I can say, where we just account where and that's it. But we have few models where we know that there's columns with big chunk of data on it. So for those, we have specific concerns to avoid to select just this field, because we know that it's too big. And we have also tons of constraints inside the app for what is related to the database. So when you do a migration, there is a lot of things you are forbidden or you must do to be able to merge it. So for every field, we ensure there is a proper size, etc. You cannot go bigger than that because we know too much. And we have a lot of targets that teams must ensure. So a table must be much that this amount of data inside it, etc. That number of columns. We have a lot of constraints on the database.
I'm thinking about scenarios where you're introducing a new feature and you might need to modify existing data as part of that rollout. That needs to go through all the existing data in your database because you're changing the nature of it. Is it default? You're like, well, we'll set up new columns and we'll just have the other ones exist for a while and at some point phase those out? Or do you ever modify existing data as part of a rollout of a new feature or something?
So we don't modify data during the rollout. When I mean the process of updating, people have to do that in several phases with several rollouts. So it really depends on the operation you want to do. We have our own tooling. We have something called Safe PG migration. I think it's open source. So we use that. We have also a tool from Oncane around migration. So we cannot, for example, rename a column. We cannot rename a table. We have to do multi-step process for these kind of changes. So it's the same if you want to change a kind of data. they will probably keep the old one and have a task running in the background to write the new format. Then you enable the feature to use the new one. It's always a multi-step process. The database is a problem at multi-steps. It's a problem for performances. It's a problem because you are always short on load, and it's like every year we have to spawn new database, migrate data. It's always in the rush, but it's also a big problem from rollouting. When we put in production, running migration, there is a lot of kind of migration we cannot do anymore because of the load on the database. We cannot log for that. There is a lot of operations that are forbidden, and so we need to do it in multiple steps, or there is stuff we cannot use anymore. I don't have one in mind as an example, but yeah.
Those are the types of issues that teams at your type of scale have. Those are not necessarily things that a small Rails shop and a new application probably have to even think about. But at some point, that might need to change as your app grows and gets a little bit more complicated and takes a lot longer to add a new table or rename a table. Or you just never get to do that ever again in those situations.
I think this kind of stuff, if you have users, you should not do them at all because that's not zero downtime. So if you have a bit of users renaming a table or this kind of stuff, you will bring your website down for a few seconds. Even at, a small scale, there's some actions that you should not do that.
I can appreciate that. One of the other things I wanted to talk with you about is that, you've been working at Doctolib for a while now, and you've led several Rails upgrades there, right?
Yes.
I think you said you started using Rails around Rails 5. Was that approximately the version you were, when you started working at Doctolib, was that the version they were running on as well?
Yes. Basically, when I joined, there is some freelancers that were upgrading from Rails 4 to Rails 5. And the day I joined, so they were doing that. And then I took over for the remaining.
Has that historically, while you've been there, been like a one-person responsibility or primarily you, or is there a little bit more of a team effort to accomplish that?
It was a personal at the beginning, and since now 1 year and a half, 2 years, I have a dedicated team. So we do it in teams. But yes, at the beginning, there is no ownership over this kind of stuff. We had only feature teams specialized on product and nothing related to the platform and non-applicative code. So it was more on a boy scout rule. That was my thing.
What's something you learned the hard way about upgrading Rails apps?
I think you cannot change something or it makes your test pass and that's it. I have been beaten by that too much. I have this test, it doesn't pass. I change that. The test is green. I don't really know why, but now it's green and I'm happy and I just go with that. And that's what will fail in production for any reason, because I haven't deeply understood the change behind it. And so I just either adapted a bit the test or changed one line of the config, but without properly understand the whole picture here, the big picture. And that's the thing. So for every Rails upgrade we do, for every change in the codebase we have an explanation. Okay, this is because we changed that in the framework, pair link, and we make sure we have understood the change upstream. And that's the way. It takes time.
Are you able to then keep relatively up to date these days then? Or have you got to the point where you're like within a major version release, or are you up to date right now?
We are up to date. We don't spend much time on it, to be honest. Over the year, we have improved, so it's easier. We have removed patches. We have tried to upstream stuff. We have also sticking to the default on some configuration, etc. It makes everything easier. So overall, now we have a well-oiled process and it doesn't take too much time. And I think Rails have also improved a lot to ship less breaking changes, or sometimes it's not even, they don't know that it's breaking changes, okay? And sometimes it's your fault, sometimes it's a bit gray area. It's easy in Rails to plug yourself in things you should not. Yeah, we have taken care overall over the year to remove all those gray things and patches and things where we were using private API. So it's now, I would say, pretty trivial.
Have you needed to do anything like remove certain types of dependencies, like certain types of gems that might have been used in the past that might have prevented you from upgrading because it was not going to work with the next version of Rails? Or is there kind of a philosophy about how you approach when you bring in some...
So I listened to the podcast you had with Jean, where he was talking about these gems that put like, I don't want active record 9, for example. And yeah, we removed that because I think about, for example, this gem bullet, I think for N+1. It was really complicated to use this gem because it takes a while before they roll out the support for the next Rails version. So I'm not blaming you. It's not. So yes, for this specific gem, it was complicated. They had an hardcode version of Rails inside active record inside it, and so we removed this kind of stuff. Overall, I think that's probably this hard limit.
We talk with a lot of in my company because we get brought in to help teams with their upgrades because they have a bunch of people working on their features, and nobody on their team has a lot of experience doing it, finishing an upgrade. Like there's plenty of people that have started upgrade project. They created a branch. They did that for a couple of weeks. They got stuck, had to switch back to a feature. And then 6 months later, they're like, where was I on this upgrade? And they can't figure out how to build momentum there. So they'll call a company like us to come in and help them with that. But I'm always like, ideally, you as a team need to figure this out and how to keep this a regularly part of your process. And so at Doctolib scale, you're able to like have a team that's just thinking about the developer experience. Do you think you'd have any advice for smaller teams on how they can start to mitigate that themselves?
It's like a lot of things. To get better at it, you have to do it and put your hands on it. It's not that hard. You have to try to understand the changes, and to that, your best friend is often bundle open. You open the gem, you open the Rails code base, and you try. We have the chance to work with language that is easy. It's so easy to read, easy to understand. So most of the Rails code base, most of the gem are very easy to grasp. And I think we should take advantage of that to try to understand what have changed. Okay, the diffs, then you have the pull request. Once you have the pull request, you have the context, and you have why it's done, why we change that, and then you easily can make the change needed inside your code base.
It's so easy. Just open up, you use bundle open and look at the code base, and you'll figure it out. You can read the Rails source code. It's not that scary.
Yes. I haven't contributed to Rails that much. I think one hand is enough. I am maybe less, but yet I think I have the repo open all the time in my computer, and I spend days to. It's amazing. I have tried to do the same. We are using React for the front end at Doctolib. I have tried to do the same with React. It's
no comment.
It's a nightmare. And so
it's also my understanding that Doctolib provides a CLI tool that helps your new engineers get set up. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
So what we call dctl, it's a CLI made by Doctolib. It's in Go, I think, something like that. And we use it like an entry point for many things. We have a lot of commands into it. There is like a team dedicated to that. And we have also community-based plugin we can add it to, etc. You get a new computer, you just tap the repository, and then you are able to brew install dctl. And once you have done, you can just pour dctl dev-env, and it will set up your laptop end-to-end to have Ruby node. Then you can launch the application. It will install all the tools. Then there is a lot of commands into it. Like if you want to connect to staging, for example, we can connect to the staging database to try some performance stuff, to have a bit more of data. Everything goes through that. It's great tools for the onboarding. You just dctl dev-env and hop, you're up and running.
That's interesting. So you can allow that to make it easy. Are you using like Docker locally as well?
Yes, we have Docker, but only for data store.
Okay.
So we have Redis, Elasticsearch, and Postgres into it.
So you got your databases there, your data storage. Rails is just running on your Mac machines or whatever. And then if you want to connect to a staging database or environment, that'll then just automatically connect that for you.
Yeah, I just do dctl staging connect, and I'm connected to the staging database.
I can see how that could be really helpful. What about things like seeding your local database with enough data, given how large of a platform you have?
That's a big topic we haven't talked about. That's, I think, one of the best things around fixtures. It's once you have fixtures, and if you use fixtures to your test, you have basically your seed environment. So we don't do that. We have a bunch of fixtures that we use, but we don't use them in test. We use them to seed our environment. And that's basically how we do it. I know that some team have also some reg tasks for specific cases. They seed when they want. They don't add them to the fixtures set for everyone because it will be too slow. But we don't have anything magic around that. So we have some fixtures in YAML that we load in the seed.rb and skin it.
Do you think this is like a thing that it would be nice if the Rails framework itself provided some more functionality in this space? Or do you feel like this is only an issue with certain organizations when they get certain size of an engineering team or certain size? Because I'm primarily talking like on the podcast with a lot of people that are working at really large so I'm just like, wow, I feel like this is the seed situation that we might have on a brand new MVP is very different than 12 years later into an application. And so like, how do we kind of connect the dots so we're not having to figure out these little creative things? Every organization is trying to solve this problem themselves.
To be honest, I haven't looked a lot about this topic. I have seen some people try to push their own DSL and etc. around it. I don't know if Rails should push for something. Maybe they should double down on fixtures and make sys.rb load the test fixture by default. I don't know, something like that. I will be pretty happy about it because I think every toy project I do, that's the first thing I do. Not sure we are needing more tooling around it. Often teams will need big corp, etc. We want to have real data from staging. It's a bit too much for the framework to go in that direction. I think if you're at the stage where you need that, you probably have the manpower to do it. And anyway, it will be too specific from what you have to.
It's interesting because I work in the consulting space. And so we come into different clients and a lot of smaller teams don't have really super efficient ways to do it. And plenty of clients like will see that their team is needing to pull like a production database snapshot into like a staging like environment. They might be scrubbing the data and then using that so that they can test out something because they can't test this work, try to fix an issue that might be only showing up in production without having some more realistic data. And we're not going to give their developers direct access to connect to their production database. So they're trying to find all these interesting, but they don't have that big of a team to figure all that out. And so they're like, well, what do we do in the meantime? And there's not a lot of good patterns, I think, that are at least not easy to find in commonly shared. Cause like everybody's like, I don't really know how to best like, and they ask us for advice. And I'm like, well, you can do what these big companies are doing when they have someone specially focused on that problem. And like, you can't afford that. So I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
Be more successful as a company. I don't know.
No, I don't know. But for this kind of stuff, we connect to staging. That is refresh from production and where we scrub the data, etc. That's how we do, basically.
I want to circle back to upgrades in particular. What's the strategy there? Are you doing anything like dual boot there? Are you running things? You have a branch that's running against the latest code in main on Rails, or?
Yeah, so when there is a new version of Rails shipping, a major one, depends of the time frame we have, etc. But if we have the time early, we start with the alpha. Often they release the alpha. So we start to open the pull request, run the bin Rails update, something like that, command to update the configuration, etc. And the first thing we try to have is the CI running. Okay, often the CI will crash. So we fix this kind of crashes. And once the CI is running, we know the number of tests that it will be failing. Then we do the back and forth with the CI-driven development, where we try to have the CI run. So we will fix everything by yourself, every test, every code, every change needed. So we won't ask team to do it. We will do it ourselves. Sometimes we consult them to better understand the feature, but we basically do everything ourselves. And we have something close to green, we will backport changes. So I mean by that everything that is needed for the next version, but we can already merge it to main, we do it. So at the end of the day, we want to have the smallest change possible. So we do pull requests to offload that and offload that. I don't mention it, but of course, as I said just before, we have a link to every change on Rails for every change we have done inside the pull request. And on the CI is green and we have the smallest change possible, we will merge that through what we will call the dual boot. So once it's merged, everything will run on the next version of Rails. So locally, all the CI, all our staging, pre-prod environment, this kind of stuff will run with the next version, but not production and production CI. Okay. So everything is next except the production and production CI. And then we do that for an amount of time. It will depend of the confidence we have with the change. It will depend also with the agenda of the organization. As it's a big change, we often have to, when we can do it, and once we have the green light to do it, we remove the dual boot and we go on. That's basically the process.
When you talk about backporting, do you organize those commits in a way that you can just cherry pick those commits in particular, or Is that generally how that works, or like to bring back into main, or how granular do you try to keep those changes to, or is it because you have this branch with a bunch of like, you get the test suite passing again?
Yeah, we group them by res changes, like, okay, this configuration has changed, we need to change this code, we will group them together. Okay, that's a change in Rails that have led to this diff. That's basically how we group them.
Do you feel like you've gotten to a good pattern of like, as you're navigating one of those upgrade branch, and you got your branch, you're working through getting your test suite running in the first place, and then working through the broken test at that point, that you have a good like kind of pattern recognition to spot like, oh, these things seem to be kind of clustered, so I'm going to focus on that area for a while? Because I know that when you do that, sometimes it's just like, oh, there's a bunch of things going on, and you're like, how do you prioritize where you go? And it's like different rabbit holes you could potentially go, which I think is what makes people a little nervous about doing it, because it feels like you can go in any direction. There's a bunch of fires popping up in parallel. How do I approach this?
Yeah. So in our case, our CI is reporting us the most common pattern of failures across our test. So I run the whole test suite, and you will say me like 10,000 tests is failing because of that. And I often focus by those one first, the big one. So you are pretty happy because you saw the number of green tests grow a lot. And yes, the remaining 100 are the slowest to do, because it's always a different case. But that's basically how we do it.
That makes sense. When thinking about tests, could you tell us a little bit about how your team addresses and avoids, is it safe to assume that you still have flaky tests appear at times?
Yes, it's a massive topic. We have something around almost 20,000 end-to-end tests. That's something that doesn't grow a lot anymore. Completely changed the strategy, and we have not stopped, but we try to avoid to have too much end-to-end test because of the flakiness. The cost also, but a big part of it is because of the flakiness. We have invested a lot on solve the flakiness problem over the year. I think it's a 7 years project. And so we have a lot of things. We have, I don't know if you have that in US, but in Europe, we have this Nutri score. So basically, when you buy something which is food, there is a score, A, B, C, D, mm-hmm. If it's good for your health or not.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so we have basically the same for test. So we are having metrics coming from the main bunch, and we are computing a score for a test. This test is flaky to this number of percentage. So here's the Nutri score, and then the team have it, and then we push bug to them. They have to fix them, etc. We have a lot of strategies on retrying. If they fail 2 times in a row on the CI, we automatically skip them and create a bug ticket to the team so they have to fix it. So yeah, we have a bunch of process to try to link them. With the new framework, we have introduced Capybara Lockstep also. It's a German company that have open sourced that. So basically, most of our flakiness come from the React frontend. So Capybara state is not in sync with the front-end state, and it tries to click on a button, but the JavaScript is not ready, and it fails, okay? Or the drop-down is popping, but not finished yet, and we try to, it doesn't work. Button is moving, and we click not on. That's often this race condition with the front-end. It's like 70%, 75% of our flakiness. So Capybara Lockstep try to address that by synchronizing Capybara with the state of the front-end. So Capybara will have basically a mutex and do nothing until the page is loaded, until Ajax query have been fired, the browser is idle, the network is idle, etc., etc. That have fixed a lot of problem we had, I think, but still there is still a lot of flakiness coming from the front end, and so that's why we have all this process. And I think the best strategy we had is basically make them less noisy and forcing people to work on it by skipping them.
Just pulled that up. So I see the Capybara Lockstep, not Lockstep. Okay, so I'll include links to this in the show notes as well. It's such an interesting thing that...
Yeah, it's really nice, huh?
Why can't Capybara just do this from the get-go? Why is JavaScript so complicated?
I think it will improve with... so to do that, Capybara Lockstep have some hacks and some JavaScript snippets you need to include and stuff. But Selenium is migrating to BD, which is a new protocol to communicate with browser. So it directly communicate with the browser instead of having the Chrome driver. And thanks to this new protocol, Selenium will have more information about the browser states and should improve, I hope. Or we will at least be able to build more reliable tool to synchronize the state.
You mentioned your team uses React. Is that code within the Rails app? Are you using like React on Rails, or is that a separate repository where all the front end live? This is opening up a can of worms.
That's a good question. So when I joined, I never use React on Rails, but I think there is like this Ruby helper where you can do React component and it will mount a component into your Slim page, or your ERB page, etc. So we have this pattern in the code base, and that's one of the way we did in the past for some part of the application, like in admin pages. We did that also in the patient website, but no, now we don't do that. We have a proper SPA. It's still the monolith that renders the first HTML layout, but then it directly mounts the SPA into it.
I see. And so in a local environment, then people are spinning up the React SPA, and that's then has the Rails app running as well there?
Yep. So we have a Webpack dev server running and the Rails application running, which is not ideal today. React web server is a Webpack dev server, sorry. Consume a lot of RAM, put our machine under heavy pressure. It's one of the biggest driver of bad dev experience currently.
Are there any non-Rails patterns or ideas that have been especially successful in your code base there?
To be honest, I don't know. We mostly stick to what Rails have. Maybe in 3 or 4 years, I will tell you, because with all this modularization topic and new services going on, we're starting to introduce Kafka. And so we will probably see some patterns you don't have in usual Rails app coming. So yeah, there's nothing coming to mind. I mean, the Rails engine stuff, etc. I think it gave us a good runway. It's not perfect, but it gave us a good runway.
Is there anything that your team does differently than you think most Rails teams do?
I don't think so, no. I mean, with the scale, we have different things. We have 10 database, this kind of stuff. But at our scale, I think people will do the same as us. I did my best to try to stick to it, And if I can say, we have been pretty lucky on that direction, because Shopify have paved the way for many things, and they have put that in the framework. So we have benefited a lot from that. They give us, the direction, and they also gave us the tools. When we needed to have multi-database, Eileen just merged it. She was at GitHub at that time, but just merged it in Rails. So we had to upgrade, and we had the multi-database. So there's a lot of things we do. We just get it from either Shopify or Rails because they have done it and then they merge it.
It seems to me that Rails has definitely been part of Doctolib's success maybe early on. I don't actually know a lot about how the organization started, but was one of the founders a software developer themselves, out of curiosity?
So there is 3 founders, and out of the 3 founders, 2 were technical.
And they started that first Rails app?
Yeah, exactly.
It seems to be a common theme in a lot of the conversations I've been having with different companies. And so do you think that Rails is still one of Doctolib's, I'm air quoting, secret weapons?
I think so, yes. Pretty sure some people at the company will say no, but I'm kind of the people that think that yes. It's a good example, but I think onboarding. Every Rails app I know looks the same. There is teeny differences, like they use service object, we don't. Okay. There is query object, we don't. Okay. But most of them look the same, and it's trivial to navigate to it. Okay. I have an account test. I have an account controller, I have a controller test. So it allows us to onboard, I think, people really fast, because if they have a bit of experience with Rails, it's really easy for them to catch up. If they don't, the structure is so self-explaining, and Ruby help a lot also here at the code level. It's so easy to read. So I think it's so trivial to grasp Rails, and even in a big code base, I think it's a big advantage, the simplicity.
I can appreciate that. I think about when teams are growing and people come in at different points and maybe they have different experiences, or at a certain scale, people might come to an organization and they've worked with different tech stacks and they have different experiences to bring. And they're like, well, we used to do this differently in this other company I worked at this larger scale. Rails seems different in certain ways. Like I wish I had some of the things that I could lean on, but then like there's a lot of like, there's different people in different roles as well. And so I'd imagine, I feel like sometimes I talk with people at large organizations and they're like, there's some people that are like, well, not everybody loves Rails as much as I do, but, and like, you know, or it's just becomes this interesting kind of thing where you get different people, different like ideas there. And not everybody there is living and breathing Ruby on Rails necessarily either, because you've got your React developers, I'm imagining, and different people focusing on different things. And like, there's this interesting tension of the competing forces on like what's slowing different people down based off of where they're spending the majority of their time. And so it's good to hear that Doctolib is able to keep up on Rails. You have that large of organization, it's been able to scale with you, and you're able to look at Shopify and see how Shopify is paving the way to make that possible, so you can keep working with Ruby on Rails there and kind of just follow their breadcrumbs that they're leaving as they're going, like, follow us this way. It's working. This is going to work out.
Yeah.
Those are things that we didn't have 10 years ago. And we used to have these conversations like, well, Rails might not work in this sort of larger situation of companies kind of get to. And you have other issues where you're just hitting issues with like AWS database, sizes and stuff like that. And that's not necessarily Rails' fault. That's not a Rails issue. Some people.
Yeah. As most of the web scalability things, it's always a database.
A couple of last quick questions for you. Is there a technical book that you find yourself recommending to teammates or peers over and over again?
To be honest, I don't read that much book, but I have this book, this software engineer guidebook from Gergely Yours. I have to read. I heard good thing about it, so maybe if I have to recommend one, it would be this one. It's not technical per se, it's more how you are a tech lead, how you lead things, how you lead change. And I think when you work at big corp, it's one of the biggest challenge you have. It's always about humans and how you bring the change to the table and how you are able to have things moving forward instead of just changing code. It's pushing code and change stuff. It's the easy part.
I think refactoring your code is one thing. Refactoring how your team communicates and makes decisions on things is a whole nother big challenge. And I don't know that Rails solves that itself. But I'll definitely include links to that book in the show notes as well. I'm curious, where can listeners best follow your thoughts or ruminations about software engineering or Rails? Or does Doctolib have like an engineering blog? Do you publicly talk much about this stuff? You mentioned having gems and stuff that you've released as an organization as well, right? Where can I direct people to?
Good question. I think we had an engineering blog at some point, but nobody's taking care of it anymore. So we had a Twitter also, but I don't think people are taking care of it anymore. So to be honest, I don't have much for the open source work. It's on our GitHub organization.
I'll track down these for everybody. And maybe when this episode comes out, you'll have an excuse to write a blog post that like, hey, check out that episode on Rails on the engineering blog. There you go. I've given you a free blog post. Get that rebooted. Thanks so much, Florent, for stopping by to talk shop with us on Rails today.
Thanks a lot, Robby.
That's it for this episode of On Rails. This podcast is produced by the Rails Foundation with support from its core and contributing members. If you enjoyed the ride, leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. It helps more folks find the show. Again, I'm Robby Russell. Thanks for riding along. See you next time.